Well, I was very fortunate to live in a period of time that's probably more change than any other period of time in history. I was 16 when my sister Norma was 7 years old, getting ready to go out to the field with a team of horses. I'm Dick McGuire, third generation dairy farmer. In fact, we're right here where I was born and my father was born. Had a small dairy farm originally, about 8 or 10 milk cows.
January 1960, about 54 cows. We shipped 57,000 pounds of milk that month. That's what we ship today per day. The efficiencies are off the chart compared to where they were 100 years ago. We can do more with less, way more productive, way more environmentally friendly in terms of production. One guy can do the work of maybe 10 or 12 today versus 100 years ago. Everything is more mechanized now. Carrying milk cans certainly is a thing of the past. We're more management, more efficient, more technological than previous generations for sure.
In 1908, my great-grandfather and father started selling milk door to door by the dipperful with 8 cows. Today, we're milking 2,300, 2,400 cows, everything from cow handling to agronomy to information management to genetics. Just about every management area, even in my lifetime, has certainly exponentially changed.
Farming, I guess, has evolved from more of a manual labor, physically demanding job, where it still is physically demanding because you work long hours and you're on your feet a lot. But I would say there's definitely more thinking and more training involved. It's not just throwing hay bales and grunt work.
The story of the dairy industry and agriculture in general was very little change for over 100 years. As long as we were using teams of horses and manpower, agriculture didn't change much. The same things that were used at the time of the Civil War were used into the 20s. It wasn't until 2 things particularly happened. Tractors began to appear in this area in the 30s, and electricity. Electricity arrived to some farms in the 30s, but it wasn't until the 40s that every farm had electricity. Those 2 things made it possible to change a lot of practices in the dairy industry as well as other types of farming. And farms just gradually got better and better.
We are operating in a global environment now as opposed to a community's environment or a national environment. It's a global environment. And that has propelled farm size, farm efficiency, and farm technology.
As a kid in the 20s, we were milking 8 or 10 cows. We had a milking machine run with a gasoline engine. We didn't have electricity. And so I experienced a little hand milking, and I'm very glad I had that experience. One man could milk about 8 to 10 cows if he was a good hand milker. That was the unit of a one-man operation, and that limit lasted from the early 1800s clear into the 20s. The milking machine made it possible to milk more cows. This is a stationary handle here, and you pumped it sideways like this, and the milk come out into the middle and run out into a pail. That's how primitive it was. The only thing was it milked 4 tits instead of 2. I have no idea how many they sold. There's only 2 of them in existence.
When my grandfather farmed, he'd have, 4 or 5 milking units. He'd move that to every individual cow. He'd do, prep the cow and attach the milker, and he'd watch every individual cow as he's milking. Where now, farms have gotten bigger. We move the cows to the milking facility.
When I first started getting involved, we were probably milking, I would guess, 50 cows maybe an hour. And now we're doing 450 cows an hour with our present facility. So over the years in my lifetime, the square footage per animal in the barns has changed. Cows used to be tied up all the time. Now they're in housing facilities that are freestall, where they're free to move around. They can eat when they want, they can drink when they want. The size of the stalls are significantly larger. a certain amount of time a day cows spend grooming, and they've got these automatic scratchers that have become really popular. Cows use them all the time. Cows are very sensitive to temperature, so in the summer months when it's really hot, we've developed sprinkler systems. All these things help improve the way a cow, how comfortable she is and how much more milk she's able to produce.
We judge all of our efforts on the cow's production and productivity. If the cows weren't satisfied with their environment or the way that they're handled, they're not going to be productive, and our margins are not strong enough to warrant poor production. The cows are, I think, pretty happy with what they're doing.
So we balance a diet specifically for these animals, and we do it specifically for each individual age group too. So, you know, a 6-month-old heifer might not have the same nutritional requirements as a 2-year-old heifer that's getting ready to calve. So we're balancing like macro and micro nutrients, like your minerals and your vitamins, like for each individual specific animal.
A lot of parameters we track with the cows in order to be a better caretaker for the cows. I can look at a handwritten ledger from 1960 and see quite a bit of information on that. So in here, we can still see these cows. Their whole production history was recorded by hand. Looks like Doris made out pretty good. She's got 4 pages. Then there's Martha. I wonder where Mom and Dad got all their kids' names from. Today we use computers, and those tools weren't available in 1960. You had to sort through a ledger. Albeit, you had 24 cows to sort through, so it was probably fairly easy. Today, if you had 700 cows to sort through, you pretty much would need a computer.
We use a lot of technology on a daily basis. Every time you feed an animal or you're breeding an animal, you always have to enter that into our software programs, or you know, you're keeping track of a lot of stuff on the computer.
Our cows wear collars. They're like Fitbits. They monitor the number of steps in a day, and if their activity is really abruptly diminished, then it creates an exception list where you go and find these cows, take their temperatures, and check their milk production to see why their activities have changed.
This is low rumination cow list. Out of 2,400 cows, this is our list of 12 cows that need to be looked at.
So the calf, as they go in, they get read with the transponder on their ear. The computer knows specifically what calf it is, how much she's drank, if she's been in there. All this technology gives us a lot of data that you can then analyze. You might look and see, oh, there's a calf off. You go check the computer and say, okay, yep, she only drank 50% of the milk as she drank yesterday. Like, we can make an assumption, hey, that calf's probably sick, and then we go out and observe that calf and treat her accordingly.
There's so much time a day you can visually observe animals, whereas with technology, you're monitoring their activity 24 hours a day. I mean, that's what technology is about. Cows still have to be treated. It's a biological animal, and it has to be cared for, just like any other animal. Computers don't do that. They just provide an opportunity to do a better job.
Maybe 100 years ago, it was worth bragging about if you cut 5 acres of hay in a day, and today we can cut 30 acres an hour. I have some first-hand experience with, you know, when I was young, riding on a tractor and might have pulled into a 10-acre field and just done the headlands for that day, and then the rest of the field another day. But today we'll do 20 different fields in one day. Heard stories about planting with horses and a planter, and then there was a string that went from one end of the field to the other so you could keep a straight line. And today we don't use a string, but we use 9 satellites that guide us with auto steer in the tractor in order to plant in a straight line. When we're planting anywhere from 75 to 100 acres a day, as opposed to maybe just a couple acres a day. The way we measure things is pretty precise, and it's taken agriculture maybe to a more scientific level than it ever has been, I believe.
Well, we have a GPS on our corn planter. So you download the map of each individual field. We can go out and soil sample, and you can say, okay, this part of a field has clay soils and this part of the field has loam soil. So like it'll say, okay, this part of the field, you know, the clay soils need a little bit more nutrients for that corn. So like the corn planter can automatically like use more fertilizer there in that part of the field, but then might drive 10 feet ahead and it might change soils so it can change the rate of application. So you more concentrate what part of the fields need it and what part of the fields don't. Then when you go to harvest, you know, like, okay, these soils where I put X amount of fertilizer yielded this much. You've got to continually be thinking about what's next, what's the best, like how can we treat our animals better, how can we make a little bit more money here or there, how can we get a little bit more out of using a little bit less resources.
I'm most proud of the fact that I left the fields and the land and the buildings in better shape than they were when I got them. I took a lot of pride in developing better cow families, better production per cow.
I think the goal that is evident here is that we want to maintain and sustain a business that can be carried on by others. And that's been true for generations and hopefully more.